Hi, I'm Jessica Brown from the Centre for Independent Studies, and I'm here at Concilium, our annual conference, with Gordon Chang, the author of The Coming Collapse of China. Welcome, Gordon.
Thank you.
Look, we're often told that China's rise is inevitable, but it seems that you argue quite the opposite.
I think that it's inevitable that it will fall apart. The conditions that gave rise really to China's spectacular 3 decades of growth either no longer exist or disappearing fast. So for instance, China had this transformational reform under former leader Deng Xiaoping. It was called reform and opening up, and that's what the Chinese did. But now, under Hu Jintao, the current leader, he's embraced a new paradigm of closing the country down. So it's no longer, just stalling a reform. It's actually a reversal of reform. Also, China prospered because of the end of the Cold War. When the political barriers to trade came down, China could export a lot. Now the barriers, trade looks a little bit iffy around the world, especially with the impending failure of the Doha round. And also, maybe the most important reason, and that is that China's reform era coincided with the demographic dividend, which was this extraordinary bulge in the Chinese workforce. Well, the Chinese workforce is going to start to shrink in 2013, maybe 2014. That becomes a demographic tax when one worker supports 2 parents and 4 grandparents. That's going to be very difficult for China to overcome.
And does China have policies, or is there thinking in place to deal with these trends?
I actually think that right now China is going through this political transition, and because of that transition, I believe that the leaders are not dealing with the problems, because the transition is supposed to start at the end of 2012 with the 18th Party Congress, and then you go on to 2013 when there's a transition for the central government. Under the Chinese system, it generally takes new leaders about 2 years to sort of find their feet and to be able to sort of then consolidate their position. And so nothing really meaningful will get done until about 2014, 2015. Right now what we see are some very serious problems. Everybody knows what to do, but the senior leaders aren't doing it because they're close to the end of their terms. And really what they're doing is they're trying to kick the can down the road. So they're trying to gun growth, for instance, to mask these serious structural issues that they're just not dealing with.
And you mentioned that Hu is now closing down the country. What do you mean by that?
Couple things. First of all, he's renationalizing the economy, and that's closing off opportunities not only for foreign investors, but more important for domestic private entrepreneurs. Also, what he's trying to do is build up the so-called national champions, because he wants Chinese companies to exploit the opportunities in the Chinese market. And so he's trying to take technology from foreign companies, trying to make the environment more restrictive for foreigners. And that is closing the country down in a very real sense. And this is a reversal of what Deng Xiaoping did, which was to open up China to foreign investment. So right now you have foreigners really complaining about what's going on in China because they see that the state enterprises, along with the central government, are really rigging the system much more than in the past.
And this sort of economic shutting down, at the same time we've seen in the last few months a crackdown on democracy activists. Do you think that there is a connection here, the political and the economic trends?
Yeah, both have coincided under Hu Jintao. The political crackdown has become really pronounced in the last couple years, really just before the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing. But it really been going on since 2002, 2003, 2004, although it wasn't so pronounced. And especially since February of this year with the so-called Jasmine Revolution protests, these peaceful protests, the government's response has been overwhelming. And so essentially they are really reversing both the economic reform and politics at the same time. And so this is almost unprecedented crackdown, the worst we've seen since the Tiananmen demonstrations of 1989. So China's moving in all the wrong directions at the same time.
And where do you see this going? What does the future hold?
I think the political system is not going to survive. I really see problems. First of all, the problems are going to be economic. We're seeing, for instance, accelerating inflation, slowing of growth, really a lot of negative signs for the economy. I think that that's going to manifest itself in political problems. We already see all these protests and demonstrations across China. We don't really know how many, but some people have said that there were 280,000 protests last year. You know, clearly that was up from the 60 to 70,000 that we saw in the middle of the last decade. Clearly the trend is up. Chinese society is volatile. And we're not only seeing just protests and strikes, what we are seeing are riots and minor insurrections. And this is something that was evident in June of this year in cities where you had worker protests. And we've seen a number of them even since this month. So the problem for the Chinese society is that most people, I believe, in China think that a one-party system is no longer appropriate for China's modernizing society. They may fear the Communist Party, and so they might not want to do anything about it, but it really means the party is staying in power only really through increased coercion. And that's not a good formula because it is not sustainable for the party.
So in the long run, do you see there's often a hope held out that this will mean a transition to democracy in China? I mean, what do you think the prospects of that are?
Well, long term, I think the prospects for that are good. The Chinese people want what everybody else in the world wants, what we want. They want more say in their lives. So eventually it will happen. But whether it'll be a nice gradual transition, which is what everybody wants, or whether it will follow the pattern for prior Chinese transitions, which have been violent and chaotic, that we don't know. I'm afraid because of the Communist Party's intransigence that this won't be what we all hope for. But nonetheless, you know, it's clear that the Chinese people do want a more open political system, and one way or another, they will get it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining us here in Australia, Gordon Chang.
Thank you.
Thanks.